a sinister blessing. The wind was soft, and the dense black clouds hovered above, seeming to stay suspiciously still. The street lights illuminated the road into town in distorted shades of orange. The sky above was its obsidian and midnight blues. An SUV with two men were on their way to break into a rich man's house to steal his valuables. They had it all planned out with one driver and one burglar. Dennis Thompson was a desperate and hungry man. He had no inner moral quarrels with theft and home invasion. To him it was a mission. It was like a job. He clocked in as soon as he jumped into Fred Slaughter's SUV on a Monday night in February. His wife was in a coma. His children were grown and in foreign provinces. He was pushing 65, and this was going to be his last heist. This job would secure the funds he needed for Linda, who laid in that hospital bed with the feeding tube, catheter, IV, and drugs, forming a haystack of wires that found their ways to the machines with monitors watching her vitals. Now this here guy that we're robbing is super rich. Bet we will get all kinds of stuff, won't we, Uncle? Who is he anyways? Dennis and Linda had been married for 34 years before they were involved in a near-death car crash. Dennis was banged up, but Linda suffered severe head injuries and had spent the last 5 years floating on life support, while Dennis postponed his retirement indefinitely to foot the bill. Their children haven't visited once. It was Linda's wishes to never be kept on life support, but she never made a will. Her father was a retired preacher who still gave sermons from time to time, just for free, at the expense of Dennis's patients. He owns the hospital that Linda has been at for a while now. Dennis patted Fred's shoulder. He told him about the tycoon that owned the hospital and how him and Linda's father and nobody could foot the bill. The two men drove for some distance until Dennis added, "Fucker makes 7 times what you and I make, more or less. I owe this hospital $200,000. Let that sink in a bit. Or not." "Okay, 1123 Parker Lane, we're here, boss," said Mr. Slaughter, who accompanied Dennis for a total of 7 different robberies in the past 5 years. Mr. Slaughter was the child of Linda's sister, Anne. He was 40, and while he was more spry, able, and willing to have the older of the two gentlemen be the driver, Dennis insisted that his nephew drive to mitigate the risk of him getting swept up into trouble. "Uncle Dennis," Fred spoke as Dennis opened the passenger door. He looked back at him with bright green eyes. "Be careful in there. Now I know nobody is home, but worst case scenario is guard dogs. The security system has already been disarmed. I checked 4 different times on my monitor since we got here." "Don't worry about me," his uncle smiled, patting a lump in his jacket pocket. Fred Slaughter looked at the mailbox and saw the name T. Verfressen. Dennis had already started walking towards the back of the property where the unlocked gate was when Fred hollered, "Wait, we're robbing Theodore Verfressen? You gotta be crazy, Uncle." You just stay in the driver's seat and, like we always plan, flee at the first signs of trouble. I can take care of myself." Fred wanted to stop his uncle, but Dennis, determined with a gurgling in his stomach from too many nights of rice and beans or ramen, walked briskly into the shadows of the crabapple trees lining Verfressen's garden. And with a light clinky click, raising the bar of the vine-covered gate, Dennis stepped onto the Verfressen estate. Theodore Verfressen was a millionaire, but his home, however large, was no mansion. It was a Southern Gothic 3-story with a basement and attic. Not uncommon to see a nice house from the 40s still standing in the hills of West Nashville, but this one was the dream of the neighborhood. The house that gave the best candy out on Halloween and had modest but gorgeous Christmas lights year after year. In summer, rose bushes would blossom on the pampered hedges of the property's garden. The kids on that street all rumored it to be haunted, of course. It was odd that nobody was seen ever coming in or out. No gardeners, no butlers, no family, not even Theodore Verfressen. The most anyone saw was the maid on Halloween. One kid claimed to have seen the rich owner of St. Jude's Hospital where Linda rested in limbo. He said that Verfressen was watching television when the maid was handing him a stack of Reese's, Snickers, and Babe Ruth bars. She complimented the boy on his cowboy costume, and the boy, believing the town myth, claimed to have gotten a good look at Verfressen, that he was bald. Just when he turned around to look at the boy, the maid closed the door. Who was the real tycoon they called Theodore Verfressen? The myths kept piling up. Dennis didn't care. He knew Verfressen wouldn't miss anything he couldn't just buy again. So sliding into the garden entrance, he noticed how bizarrely dark it was inside this large house. The switches didn't work, even though there had been no thunderstorms yet. Dennis wondered if Verfressen was having an extended stay in his homeland far away in Germany. He squinted around with his flashlight, trying to be cautious and quiet. He bagged up half a bag of random assorted items. There was a shocking lack of electronics anywhere in the house. No televisions, lamps, or radios to be found. Dennis found a candlestick and lit it along with a cigarette. "Fuck Verfressen," he said with a cigarette in his lips, a challenging and humorous phrase to attempt. Looking around, he found curious artifacts of a bygone era. All of it was layered under dust. A shard of ice seemed to penetrate Dennis's neck and spine as his heart stopped a moment. As he stood in the room on the second level of the house, Dennis heard music. It got louder as he climbed the stairs down to the first level hallway. The scratchy sounding music began tooting out of an old tube speaker with 1930s jazz playing and an old-timey, funny-sounding voice singing, "The Uncle Dr. Hopkinson, Ita Nicholson, Ich habe dazu ein Wilf du Schwarzes es, der Uncle Dr. muss das wissen, der sagt mir, der was nicht Jungs, der Uncle Dr. Dennis panicked and froze up against the wall as he began to hear footsteps slowly pacing a room somewhere a distance away from him, and then followed the sounds of a fluttering but that could only be likened to a bird of some kind. The hallways were as dark as the rest of the house, which had been draped in cobwebs, and it was no surprise that wildlife made its way in, potentially some squatters too. Dennis put his cigarette out as he wondered silently how long Mr. Verfressen had been gone. No wonder the security system wasn't on. This house had been abandoned. And then poof! A frantic flutter of wings attacked Dennis's face. He hollered an embarrassing scream as this creature was revealed to be as too big to be a bug, was not a bird, most certainly a bat. It bit Dennis's nose a bit and went for his throat till he finally got a whack at the flying beast that chaotically fluttered about before Dennis witnessed a maddening thing any person in any place or time to see. The bat grew larger as it flew upwards to the ceiling. Its wings sparkled in the candlelight until they faded into disappearing dust, leaving an uncanny beast that was perched between the wall and ceiling, glaring down at Dennis with bloodshot black eyes and bearing two white fangs. It was a man, but not any kind of man Dennis had ever seen. It swept down on him and knocked him unconscious before Dennis could process the horrors before his eyes. Now, Fred Slaughter was a historian and a lover of musical theater. He had one earbud and he was listening to the soundtrack of the Broadway show Company, humming along to Raul Esparza's belting choruses. He had never known his uncle to case a joint for so long, never exceeding an hour. He knew the house was large, but it had been an hour and 40 minutes. He began to worry as he saw a black tabby run from across the street to the neighbor's hedges, where it disappeared. It's a large house, and Uncle Dennis must be finding loads of stuff in there. He reassured himself, fighting the urge to go help his uncle, who lay knocked out and tied up to an ottoman. He knew the rules. Flee at the first sign of trouble. Fred could never abandon his uncle, so he sat conflicted, sipping his Red Bull and wondering if the heist was worth the potential dangers. In a large basement with candles glowing around a few chairs and the ottoman that Dennis was strapped to, there was a record player spinning an old German 78 RPM record from the late 30s. A long, white, bony hand reached and switched the turntable off. Dennis looked up at the deformed man who stood above him, his image becoming clearer as his eyes woke up to this dungeon of sorts. The man before him he guessed to be a vampire, a beast Dennis had always thought to be a tired myth, an overused folk-tale trope, a wonder of the penny dreadful era. But alas, there before him it stood, looking at him with a stoic wonder. The vampire seemed worried that Dennis was hurt. It was off-putting and confusing for the older man, bound awkwardly on the floor, who gazed up, seeing what looked like a 40-year-old man, retracting his fangs, watching as the vampire's eyes turned crystal blue. "I cannot keep you here," the man said to Dennis, who looked upwards at him. "My family has had this house for 70 years. I am the last of my family. You have certain artifacts that cannot leave with you, but I cannot let you leave with any memory of what you saw. I cannot have my identity besmirched. I own a hospital, you know. I cannot have a rat scurrying away with my cheese. Rat! Rat! His head twitched as he came to, and with more control over his transforming body, he wiped away the froth of spit around his mouth. He appeared an average-looking man now. He almost fooled Dennis with his abundantly bright blue eyes that seemed to twinkle a certain innocence. "You're Theodore Verfressen?" Dennis asked, not noticing the irony in his choice of first questions. "Yes. Are you hurt?" Dennis shook his head after a brief gaze into the supernatural millionaire's eyes. The tycoon, who at once in the form of a bat turned into a beastly vampire, then a man, a seemingly caring man, now stood before Dennis, who was half worried he'd be discovered, buried in some desert, or at the bottom of some lake years later, perhaps never to leave the basement of this dark house. Just then, a large commotion of noise could be heard up above them in the kitchen upstairs. Dennis went pale and whispered to the wealthy creature of the night, "Please don't hurt him. He's just my nephew. We can leave and never come back. We won't tell anyone about that I am an undead, blood-sucking demon that lurks in the collective nightmares of old. Why, who would believe you?" The attractive businessman before him laughed a bit, and Dennis forced a chuckle when Verfressen said, "But of course, we can all be bought silent with some sort of financial persuasion. Are you sure I cannot buy your silence for some fee?" "Well, Theodore," Dennis began, "please call me by my true name, Fledermaus. Theodore became my name when I was just an 8-year-old boy. It was the autumn of 1897. Being hauled into the foggy shores of Ellis Island with my father, that bastard, it was there where half my tortures began, but also half of my fortunes. I had not yet realized it. Fledermaus, you own St. Jude's Hospital here in Nashville." "Yes, I acquired it in 2006. I moved down here from New York to escape the hustle and bustle of busy metropolitan cities, and I settled for a smaller one. The big ones with their mob-like gangs of CEOs and lawyers, the whole scene sickened me." Verfressen flipped carefully through his fragile 78 RPM record stack, the candle he had lit melting the wax down the rusty holder. "My wife Linda, she's been in a coma for 5 years. I owe St. Jude's over 200 grand. I am by no means upper middle class. I'm a janitor. That's why I'm here. It's all for that woman who loved a good vampire book as much as anyone now. She'd be amazed at your mere existence. Believe me, sir, I was just as shocked as you were to know what lay in store for myself, let alone the mere existence of these horrors that have lived for some time now. My father changed me as his father changed him. The ritual of generations. It was the day of my 42nd birthday when I was cursed with his visit. We hadn't seen each other since the turn of the century. I had lost my generational wealth in a stock market crash. My landlord had given me a notice a week prior that I had to vacate my home in a month. He was gracious enough to do so. It was 1931. I had been sitting in a stew of despair when I heard a knocking at my door. My father, who I barely recognized, plunged at me, and well, I became a curse thing, but an immortal curse thing. I've spent 100 years since then in the shadows, accumulating the wealth I lost, hardening like stone with the passage of time. Fluttermouse Verfressen stared at the floor as another loud, clumsy clang of noise came in the kitchen again. Dennis sighed and rolled his eyes, almost in embarrassment for his nephew, almost out of impatience with Fluttermouse. "Okay, go collect your nephew," Verfressen commanded Dennis. "I will personally handle the hospital billing account for Linda Thompson." Linda Thompson. Dennis let out enthusiastically. The undead philanthropist cut loose his guest ropes. Dennis hurried up to the kitchen where he found Fred struggling in the dark. "Okay, Fred, let's go." He grabbed the man and helped him to his feet among the fallen pots and pans. The two stumbled out as quickly and quietly as they could through to the garden and around to the street, where they walked down to the SUV, where they had nothing new in their pockets. Dennis told Fred that he had found the house barren and empty in all its levels and square footage. Nothing worth stealing after all. Time elapsed as Dennis tried to have faith in the vampire's promise to foot the bill. As a week turned into a month, suddenly summer had passed by. It wasn't until November 3rd that Dennis received a call from St. Jude's Hospital. He picked the phone up, expecting a bill collector to harass him as they did from time to time. It was Linda's attending physician, Dr. Kelter. "Dennis Thompson?" "Yes." "Are you busy right now, and are you sitting down?" Dennis took a deep breath and asked what was going on. "I'm afraid your wife's condition is worsening. I know you are her next of kin, and I'm aware of the decision her parents made to keep her on life support, but we have very good reason to believe she won't be around much longer, and I want to let you, her husband, know so you can be around her in her final moments. I put her in a room that you can visit." The two exchanged some information as Dennis, who was stricken with grief and exhausted, found out that the account had been cleared after all. He hopped in his truck, picked up his nephew on the way to the hospital. The two rode in silence after Dennis explained everything to Fred. They arrived, and there the love of his life laid in their hospital bed, looking beautiful but tired. Her skin was pale, somehow vibrant and glowing. Linda seemed already gone as far as Dennis had accepted in this reality. He couldn't stand to lose her, but it hurt to see her body so pale. Her sleeping, baggy eyes so worn-looking as tubes came in and out of her mouth, and her chapped lips beginning to crack. She was once a goddess in his eyes, of him being the devoted husband he was. Now she looked the part of death which had yet to claim her. He called the doctor in. He never let go of her hand. The doctor put his hand on Dennis's shoulder. Dennis arose and kissed his wife's forehead goodbye, and her monitor flatlined, and he asked if he could just have 5 minutes alone in the room. The doctor obliged and told him that he'd be right outside the room. Dennis returned to his wife's side. A certain look of peace now seemed to beam from her. The struggle was finally over. Linda, I vowed to stay sober as I have since the crash. I vowed to reconnect with our children, but tears swelled up and ran rapidly down his cheeks. You are just really gone now, aren't you? You've been gone for so long. You're still pretty. How I remember your singing voice every morning when I shower. And how I see your nephew all grown up. The kids, they just haven't been able to forgive me. I know I never will. Dennis sobbed and groaned loudly as he pushed his face onto her shoulder, crying out in the most painful shame and heartbreak. His true love was going to be gone forever. I do forgive you, dear. A raspy, tired voice said next to his ear. He looked up to see his wife with eyes going from brown to black, the whites of her eyes bloodshot, and her beautiful smile, the smile he always remembered, yet it wasn't the smile he was expecting, revealing 2 large fangs. He grabbed her with all his might and bawled. Verfressen not only kept his promise, but he had given Dennis a sinister blessing. Everything will be okay, dear. She stroked Dennis's hair for the first time in 5 long years. For her it had been a mere moment, perhaps centuries of purgatory without memory flashed in an instant. She only remembered a sharp pain in her neck in her deep sleep, and that was it. And she was starving. But she savored this moment with her soulmate. She ran her fingers through Dennis's coarse black hair, running down the back of his neck, feeling him close to her once again and rubbing the skin of his neck until she placed a lump of veins with her fingers. Dennis hysterically sobbed out of joy into her chest. Eventually, the two would leave the hospital room together, hand in hand. The doctor, dropping his clipboard and his jaw, watched speechlessly as the two strolled towards the exit and into the night. Linda smiled back at Dr. Kelter, her fangs retracting to normal as she wiped a dash of blood from her lips. Dennis smiled a toothy grin of his own. After a skip, a hop, and a flutter, the two flew off into the moonlight.